Join us, friends.
Great Scott, Spa Guy. Do they know what we have in store for them?
They will if they tighten up.
And don't double dribble. To the Grey Ghost, Spa Guy?
Exactly, old chum. No time to waste. To the Grey Ghost. We have not a minute to spare. It's showtime, friends. All right. It is the Spa Guy, but sadly, again, it is not Trey. Trey is a busy man. He will be back soon. I speak to him often, and he is sorry that he is not here, but he is so tied up. He is unable to get here, but I have my good friend David Gould here again. If y'all watched last week, you remember David. And last week, we basically talked about, I was going to say we trashed Chick-fil-A, but that's not true. We talked about the good and the bad of Chick-fil-A. And I believe there's good in Chick-fil-A too. We weren't being totally negative, but hopefully Chick-fil-A will get the message and make some changes and maybe make it a more where it's not a hassle. A lot of people don't know this, but I'm low hassle Billy. If it is a hassle, I am not going to do it. I might hassle once, but I will not hassle again. I have a very low hassle factor. I can tell you that. And so for a lot of y'all that don't know, I grew up in Eastern North Carolina. David, and I was born in, I guess you would say the Piedmont of North Carolina. So North Carolina is broken up in, if you're from North Carolina, you know this. If you're not from North Carolina, you probably don't know any of this. You have the coastal plains, you have the Piedmont, you have the mountains. That's the way North Carolina is set up. I was born in the Piedmont, but I grew up basically in the coastal plains, which would be close to the beach. David grew up really close to the beach. He was born in Morehead City. And I'll let you tell that part of it, David.
Yeah, I was born in Morehead City, and my father's a pastor, so we moved around a fair amount. So I was in North Carolina until I was about 4 years old on the Outer Banks and different places, and then moved away from the state. Moved back when I was about 9, and I was there till about the age of 16, 17, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm. So those years would be years that you would have remembered traveling with your family, remembered eating out with your family. So we're going to talk again about restaurants in this. And we're going to talk about not just restaurants, but eating in general from our formative years, from what I can recall and what you can recall way back. And I had some incidents, if you will, from way back that make me not want to eat certain foods today. And I don't know if David ever had any incidents like that, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about restaurants that we did eat in as kids that we can recall and things that we did with our family as kids. And then we'll talk about modern day restaurants, the ins and outs of all restaurants, not just one, but let's talk about the ins and outs of all the restaurants. So what is your earliest memory of going in a restaurant? Do you remember?
You know, I don't recall the first memory I have of going into a restaurant, to be honest with you. As I said, I was living in Morehead City. When we say Morehead City, man, that's like Mayberry, very small town. And so mostly local restaurants, probably had a McDonald's, but not very much when I was a baby. Lived on the Outer Banks, and that was before it was all, touristed up. So again, mostly local restaurants. So I don't remember anything specific about that. Probably by the time I lived in Cleveland, Ohio for several years. And so I remember that's when I started going to school. And so I remember going to Bob Evans with my dad on Saturday sometimes. And so that's probably one of my first restaurants that I remember. That's kind of a chain restaurant, but they had a couple of local places as well that we would go to after church or something, pizza, Mario Fazio's, and just these little hole in the wall places that, looking back, I'm like, I'd like to go back and visit those places now. Mm-hmm. Now that I kind of have a reference point from eating out. But eating out now is but we eat out a lot now. But back then, when I say we would eat out, it was like a Sunday thing. If we were going out with friends on Sunday, it was not every day by any stretch of the imagination.
We were very poor, and ours was not even on Sunday. Ours would be occasionally up until I got into, I'm going to say I was 11 or 12 years old when we would go, when I have my first memories of having a steak and stuff like that. But we'll get to that in a moment. So I want to go back to my earliest memories of, and I think I mentioned it in one of these podcasts, I think me and you were talking about, and it was on the Outer Banks. It was Kitty Hawk. And I remember being at Kitty Hawk and Mom and Dad saying, we need to go get something to eat, and going to Kentucky Fried Chicken in Kitty Hawk. And I could still remember seeing the restaurant, and it seemed like to me that it was very bare, like it was just a building with nothing around it. It was just sand pretty much around it, is what I envisioned from my mind. And I remember, and I've mentioned this before, my grandma and granddaddy, of course, had money, more so than my parents did. So when I went to grandma and granddaddy's house, we went to Kentucky Fried. They liked Kentucky Fried Chicken. I didn't like chicken. I would eat the mashed potatoes and gravy. But I have early memories, and you said you did too, of Kentucky Fried Chicken would give you these little packets that you could open that had a handy wipe in it. And it had a very specific smell to it.
Yes.
I can still smell that because my grandma and granddaddy would keep them in the glove compartment of the car and tear them open and wash my face with them as a child,
Yes.
And now we have them. You don't have to get them from Kentucky Fried. They have them in packages. You can baby wipes is what
that's what they are. Yeah,
that's true. But back then, that's where they got them from. They would go to Kentucky Fried Chicken when they ate and get extra ones and put them in the glove compartment of the car. So they had something to wipe my face with and my brother's face. I still remember that. Kids hate that when you're washing their face. I remember that feeling, but that smell at the same time.
Right.
So very nostalgic to me. And,
and
there's
the irony
things about food that's nostalgic,
Right. Well, the irony on that is what was the motto or the slogan for KFC, which was actually called Kentucky Fried Chicken when we were kids.
Yeah, it was Kentucky Fried Chicken. Yeah.
And so the slogan was finger licking good, and then there you had to sit and wipe your hands.
Yeah. Yeah. But that brings up a point. There was another commercial that was very, very popular back then, and it was M&M's. Melts in your mouth, but not in your hands. Not true, M&M. It would melt in your hands. You'd have those colors all over your fingers.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know how they got away with that, but they would always say that. And that just, when you did that, it made me think of the M&M's. Yeah.
Yeah. But you can hear those phrases. It takes you all the way back to when you were a kid.
It does.
And that shows you the value of a good phrase or a turn of a phrase.
When they hit that stuff with, okay, so I'll give you another one. And we're going completely off the subject right now, but how about Calgon?
Okay. So there's a couple of phrases I remember from Calgon.
Okay.
All right. First is ancient Chinese secret.
Huh? They would say, we need more Calgon.
Yeah, and they'd be
they were saying that there was an ancient Chinese secret in this laundry, and they found out that they needed more Calgon, and they looked at them and said, ancient Chinese secret, huh? It was Calgon.
That's right. Yeah, the stereotype of Asian people doing your laundry for you. That's classic.
And what's another one?
So then there was one called Calgon, Take Me Away.
That's it. Yep.
Yep.
And see, those stuck with us all this time.
Yeah.
When's the last time we've heard that? 30 years ago? 40 years ago?
Yeah. And it's not like I bought the product. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's there. And that's a good slogan. So
yeah.
If it sticks with you for generations.
That's exactly right. And it did. And I'm assuming Calgon is still out there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back in those days too, if you had a KFC, for instance, or Kentucky Fried Chicken, I think the menu in Kentucky Fried Chicken was chicken.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. And you go to a burger place and it was burgers. Mm-hmm. And they didn't really cross over too much. Mm-hmm. And we still had to eat there. We didn't care. If you went to a burger place, you're going to get burgers. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they're like, we got chicken McNuggets. It's like, whoa. What happened to McDonald's? And I'm not sure how good. I know it's good for variety and the family. Everybody can choose what they want to eat. I'm not so sure it's good for the brand, though. I'm not sure it's good for the business.
Well, McDonald's has done well with the chicken nugget. And I think when I was about 16, I worked at McDonald's when I was 16 for a short time, maybe a month. It wasn't long. And the McNuggets had just come out about that time. So I would have been 16 in 1980, 81-ish. So I remember that the nuggets had just come out, and I remember tasting them while I worked there and going, hey, and they still today taste just like they did back then. And that's one thing about them. But I'll tell you where I think chicken got somebody off the rails, and that is Hardee's. Hardee's was a local thing to North Carolina. Wilbur Hardy, that's actually buried in Greenville, North Carolina, not far from where either one of us grew up. Wilbur started Hardee's, and out west, if you're out west, you would know them as Carl's Jr. or what's the other name that it was under? There's another name that they were under out in that area, and I'm not recalling it right this moment, but they were known for hamburgers. They were just like McDonald's. Right. They started.
Was it Burger Chef?
No, it was. I know Carl's. I think it was Carl's, and maybe it was Carl's and Carl's Jr. It's something like that. But you still see them out west, and it still has the Hardy star, but it says Carl's Jr. on it now.
Right.
So it's still within that brand. But I loved Hardee's hamburgers, and they kind of got off the rails where they started doing chicken. So they started hamburgers, then chicken, then they started. Didn't they go down the taco thing? Like another one that kind of went tacos was
Jack in the Box.
Jack in the Box. The very first time I ate at Jack in the Box was in Arizona, in Mesa, Arizona, 1972 or 1973 in the summer. We went to visit my mother's sister. I'd never heard of Jack in the Box before, never saw Jack in the Box before, but they made a point of taking us to Jack in the Box. Now they're around here, but they kind of went off the rails. And, the one in Hendersonville didn't make it.
Right.
And a lot of its location, the one in Hendersonville, which is across from Lowe's, close to where the old Walmart used to be, that location doesn't appear to be a good location because every restaurant that's gone in there hasn't made it. I think there's just some spots that don't work.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you talked about the first time you ate it was when you went on a long trip. But talking about trips and eating, when I was a small kid, we would take sandwiches. We didn't stop at McDonald's. We didn't look for every Cracker Barrel. It was like, okay, we got sandwiches in the cooler, we got drinks, and we have chips or whatever, and we just pull off at the rest stop. And you don't really see too many people eating at the rest stop anymore. But, man, when I was a kid, that's where we had lunch or whatever. And it got us to the next place. And, of course, when you're doing that, you're out there, you're running around in the grass, you're burning off energy and ready to get back in the car and all that. So sandwiches, man, we went through a lot of sandwiches when I was a kid.
And the rest stop has picnic tables. And they have grills out there. And I'm like you, I never see anybody using any of it anymore. You really don't see that anymore. But I'll go back to what you were just talking about. As a kid, we would travel. We didn't travel much. It was going to Arizona was like the only time that I recall until I became probably 15 or 16 years old that I recall going on any trip of any length, other than maybe Cherokee one time. And I'll try to remember to tell that story real quick. It's a story of about my dad. But anyway, that we would normally go to the beach because every year my grandma and granddaddy and the family would rent like a hotel room, and we would all stay in that one hotel room and go fishing and go to the beach and go floundering at night. And they would take sandwiches to the beach. We would have ham sandwiches with mayo to the beach. They put it in the cooler. They bring drinks or water, Kool-Aid back then. That kind of stuff. And to this day, I don't like ham sandwiches because I associate being at the beach and the sand and being hot and all that stuff with eating ham sandwiches. I just don't like them. Yeah. And it's not that I won't eat ham, but that back then they didn't slice ham thin like we do now. It wasn't like a ham or like a sandwich meat. It was real thick. Right. And it was real ham. They would literally slice real ham and put it on a sandwich. Yeah. And I just don't like ham like that at all. And the other thing that happened goes back to that Arizona trip. We were poor, so we didn't have a car that could go to Arizona. So my grandma and granddaddy, I'm going to say it was 1973 because the summer of 1973 after we got out of school, because it was a Chevrolet Caprice Estate Classic station wagon, blue, 1972 model, that my grandma and granddaddy allowed my mom and dad to drive and take us to Arizona to see her sister. And we kept, now another thing that we kept in the cooler back then, and you'll be able to associate with this, I bet, is Vienna sausage and deviled meat what was that deviled meat? What they call deviled meat?
Yeah. Yeah.
It had a little devil on the can, and you would open it and scoop the meat out. But the Vienna sausage, you would open the can and just pull the sausage out. And I loved it as a kid because that was just one of those things as a kid, you thought that's how you ate. But what happened is going to Arizona, we had that stuff in the back of that station wagon and it got hot. And I opened a can of Vienna sausage and started eating them and they were hot. And I got so sick. I have not eaten any more Vienna sausage since then. Yeah. And so those are two times that I associate negative things with food and I don't want anything else to do with that food.
Right.
You know, and I'll eat a ham. I'll go get a ham sub at Subway, but just a pure ham sandwich, especially thick ham, or even eating ham at Thanksgiving and stuff like that. I'll mess with it a little bit, but it's not my thing. I really don't even like turkey at Thanksgiving. I don't like thick sliced meat like that. As far as ham, turkey, that kind of stuff, I'm more of a hamburger and a steak guy. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Did you have any incidents where you got sick on anything and you don't eat it anymore?
I don't remember. I don't remember that. You know, any kind of situation like that. One time at I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and we were at a dinner before a wedding. It was the night before, so they had the family there, and they had lasagna, and I hadn't had much lasagna, and this one had really heavy on the ricotta cheese.
Yeah.
And
I love ricotta cheese in lasagna. Yeah.
I do now, but at the time I got sick that night and I wouldn't eat lasagna for a long time until they said not every lasagna is exactly the same. And there's a lot of variations in them. So I eventually tried and I love it now. But I remember that night, man, I was sick as a dog and I thought I'll never touch that stuff again. And
but you got over it.
I got over, yeah, you can tell I got over not eating something. You know, growing up in North Carolina, and if you've ever been there recently, you wouldn't know this, but tobacco is the #1 product in North Carolina, and it basically made the state economically in so many ways. And because of that, you know, cigarettes were everywhere. It was easy to buy cigarettes. They were selling them out of vending machines. I mean, kids could buy them. You could buy them for your parents. It was crazy times. And they had mostly it was smoking in the restaurants. And then they started bringing on non-smoking sections. Well, it looking back, it's like, what's a non-smoking section in a small restaurant? Mm-hmm. Because the whole restaurant's smoking at a certain point. And they would have these like Shoney's, and you would walk in and you would ask for the non-smoking section, and they would take you all the way through the smoking section to the back corner to sit on the 4 tables that were non-smoking. Mm-hmm. Then you had to go up to the breakfast bar and walk through all the cigarette smoke to get your food and take it back to your non-smoking section.
It's true.
And that's really, I don't know how, I guess it was legal, but it didn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And we were still sitting there surrounded by smoke. But, you know, young people today don't really know anything about that. But
they smoked on airplanes back then. You could smoke on an airplane. That's unbelievable. Yeah.
I recently saw a commercial where not only could you smoke on an airplane, they advertised they would bring you a pack of cigarettes with your dinner.
Unbelievable.
You're all basically in a telephone booth. And you're
with oxygen that is highly flammable. If the oxygen alone is not flammable, but if you put it with an accelerant, it is highly flammable. Yeah.
And then they had the nerve to make you think that you could just put up a light up there and then everybody was smoking, and that would mean the smoke was gone.
Yeah.
To this day, they have no smoking lights on airplanes that they'll come on. Mm-hmm. For what? Mm-hmm. You're not allowed to smoke on an airplane, but they still have to have, I think it's by law, they have to have the non-smoking light come on. You have to not smoke. And I'm like, okay, everybody keep doing what you were doing before.
And they even tell you now, you know, you can't disable the smoke detector in the bathroom. They do it every flight. You know, they'll tell you that. You know, you better not disable that smoke detector. And and I've been on airplanes that had the ashtray on the seat. Now, I imagine most of those airplanes are retired by now, but I've been on an airplane that had had a cigarette and an ashtray made in the seat, in the handle, you know, in the arm. That's true.
It's a wonder we all don't have cancer. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Fact. And my parents both smoked when I was little. And so I was around it. And what's weird is when you're around it all the time and it just becomes commonplace to you, you don't even really think about it. But now, man, if I can be, I'll tell you this, we were staying at a beach house with Lori's mom and dad. My wife's dad smoked. And we were on the bottom floor. They were on the third floor. And I could smell it when he would light a cigarette. That's a long ways apart. That's two floors apart. And when we were asleep, I could smell it. As soon as he lit up, I could smell it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. That was
I'm really ultra sensitive to it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about since you mentioned North Carolina, let's talk about food in North Carolina. One of the things that I remember, and I know I've probably mentioned this before, is I love seafood. I love fried oysters. And the way I got fried oysters, of course, you lived in Morehead City right there by Sanitary Fish House. And guys, if y'all have never had North Carolina seafood, the name Sanitary Fish House doesn't sound great, but it is great. Now, I think Sandpiper's better in LaGrange, or even what's the one in Winterville, North Carolina? I ate there this past December. I ate both of them in this past December. It is not coming to me right this moment, but there's a great place in Winterville, North Carolina, too. In North Carolina, they do what we call calabash style, which means your shrimp do not have tails on them, and they're popcorn shrimp. They're fried oysters, fried scallops, real scallops. And the way you can tell real scallops is real ones are going to be different sizes. If they're fake scallops, they're all the same size, and they're little. Real scallops are really large.
Right.
But what I was going to say is the way I started with oysters was I went with my dad. I've mentioned before, me and you've talked about where my dad drove a truck, STs, and I would go with him. I wasn't supposed to, but I would ride with him during the summer some. And we stopped at a place down, I think it was in Belhaven, to best of my knowledge. It was a little mom and pop shop, and he took me in there and said, "Son, I'm going to turn you on to something. These are the best oysters in the world." And I had oysters that day, and I've loved them ever since. If I can get oysters, I get them. I like them fried especially, but I've also had oysters raw, on the half shell, baked, grilled, all that kind of stuff. When I was over in the Netherlands, I went to New York Hotel, which is on the harbor, and they brought out 16 different oysters from 4 different seas, 4 different salt seas. There was 4 from one, 4 from another, 4 from another, and it was really good. And 16 is crazy for me to eat. That was just an appetizer. I was by myself, but wow, it was good.
Yeah.
Do you like oysters?
Well, I'm not a big oyster fan. I'm not, but I love some of the other stuff so much I don't care. I was thinking about it recently, how when I grew up, I was a kid, and of course, I was growing up about when I would get my driver's license and all that, and we would want to go eat somewhere as kids and teens. And we were always wishing we had the restaurants like they had in New Bern, or Raleigh. Like, I wish we had some of those fast food joints, not realizing that I was surrounded by some of the best food in the world. And I didn't care. You know what I mean? Just because it was normal for us. We go to Captain Bill's or Sanitary for lunch. I'm out there working, cutting grass. We just step over there for lunch, get some hush puppies and fish and shrimp. And we were living the life, didn't even know. And I was sitting there wishing I had a Wendy's, and looking back, I'm like, man, I was an idiot. Now, man, I'd give anything to be up the street from Sanitary. You know what I'm saying?
There's nothing around here even close to that.
No. No, and that's something you can't really replicate. Fresh seafood, and I know they try in a lot of different places, but once you get a certain distance from the ocean, I know they fly it in. I understand how it works. It's just not the same. And I
love it. Here, I love it here when they say fresh catch of the day. And I'll say, really?
Yeah. So now time has a way to straighten you out in your thinking, and so I trade all the Wendy's and Burger Kings and Taco Bells and Chili's for having some of those places right next door like I used to.
Well, living here and being from North Carolina, and Lori talks about it a lot, the food in North Carolina is far superior to the food here. It just is. And it may be because that's what we got used to and where we're from. And it may be people that were born and raised in Nashville go somewhere else and they say that about Nashville. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I will say that the barbecue in North Carolina is far superior to any barbecue I've ever had anywhere in the world. I recently had some barbecue from a place in Knoxville, and it was good, but not even close to North Carolina barbecue, not close.
Yeah.
Same thing with seafood. I have down in Murfreesboro, they have Toots, and they serve fried oysters over there, and they're good, but they're not great. There is a difference. Yeah.
Well, I think part of that, I think there's an actual reason for that. So on the coast, that was the first place people came to when we started this country.
Yeah.
And so that's the oldest. They've been doing it there longer than any other place. And anything we would have inland, like Nashville or, Kansas City or these places that they have their special thing they like to do. But that's still kind of a carryover from a place that's been doing it a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like the history of that food there supersedes anything that can be added on to it later. And so we try to replicate. And I do like various things, but like you said, there's barbecue, there's seafood, and man alive, I'm hungry. I just ate supper.
We love the pizza in North Carolina as opposed to here.
That's right.
In Kinston, Pizza Villa is fantastic, and also they have those. They're not Pizza Huts, they're Pizza Villas too. But the one that's in Kinston that I'm talking about, this on Vernon Avenue, is owned by a guy that I knew when I lived there. His last name was, daggone, I'm really drawing blanks right now, and I'm so sorry. If you're listening to this, I remember you. I could see your face. I can't call your name, but it was a family-owned thing, and they had, and it was a big deal when they built it because it used to be a much smaller place, and they built their own place upstairs, downstairs. Very nostalgic looking theme booths and all that stuff. And it still looks today just like it did when it was open. And it opened when I was a teenager, and it was a big deal. But their pizza there is really good. And we had another place that I used to work at Big Al's Fish House, and the guy's name was Al Barnes. And Al also owned the pizza place. And that pizza place was my favorite ever that I've ever had anywhere. And what they did was, and this is really weird that it changes the way something tastes, but they would grind up their meats in a blender and make them real fine. And there was just something about the way that tasted. And I can't even think of the name of that pizza place. It's been 40 years ago that I had that. I've lived here for 24 years. It's been 30 years.
But you can taste it. But you can taste it right now.
I know exactly what it tastes like. So that's a good point right there, David. So let me bring up this point real quick. I haven't had, my daughter is 30 years old. I haven't had a carbonated drink, a Pepsi, a Coke, a Mountain Dew, a Dr. Pepper, anything like that since she was a baby. She's 30. So I kept telling people that I still remember, and in my mind, I still remember what Pepsi tastes like, what Dr. Pepper tastes like, what Mountain Dew tastes like, what Sprite tastes like. I drank those things. I mean, I drank Pepsi. I worked at the hospital for a short time in the cafeteria, in the coffee shop. And one of the parts of the deals, one of the pluses for working there was you could eat all you want and drink all you want. And of course, you're 16 years old, 17 years old, man, you have an appetite. I would go in and make me a Pepsi from the fountain, and by the end of the shift, I couldn't taste it anymore. It didn't taste like anything. You just bombard yourself with it. So anyway, I kept telling everybody, my family specifically, how your brothers and sisters are. They go, oh, really? So I told my brother and sister this past, I guess it was this past Christmas. It may have been Christmas before. I think it was Christmas before. And I told them what I just said. I today can tell you what Pepsi and Coke, if I was to taste it, I could tell you. And he said, okay, let's try it. So they went and got Pepsi, and they got them all. We got cups. They marked the cups, and I tried them. Do you know that they all tasted exactly the same? I could not discern one from the other.
Really?
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and Mountain Dew or Dr. Pepper specifically has a very specific, in my mind, it has a very specific taste. Mountain Dew, Sprite, Coke, Pepsi. But when I tried them for the first time in 30 years, they literally tasted exactly the same. I think I got Dr. Pepper right because it had just that extra little pinch, but the rest of them I didn't get right. And what was so weird is all of us did it. Everybody at the table. The only one there that got them all right or got more than 2 right was a guy, and I'm not going to say who it was, but he smokes and drinks. And he was the only one that got them all right.
Wow.
And you would think that if you smoke a drink, it would lessen
Right.
your palate where you wouldn't be able to taste them. He got all 6 of them right.
Man,
Yeah,
he's a
true.
beast.
That's true.
Well, and speaking of Pepsi, that's a North Carolina thing as well.
It is, yeah.
As is Cheerwine.
New Bern.
So, and I would take a pause here. If you're watching this, I would love to see in the comments what your place is famous for, what you really miss about, maybe when you were growing up in your area, because every area has its thing.
Mhm.
And when you're from an area, you have a certain thing you want to eat at or drink or go to that place when you visit home. Tell us what it is, because if we're ever in that area, we'd like to check it out.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And another North Carolina thing, which is actually spread to here, to Gallatin, where our business is at, is hot dogs and hamburgers in North Carolina. They put chili on them. You go to other places, they don't put chili. And we had Ken's Grill. We had Andy's, which y'all probably had Andy's cheesesteaks and all that, right? Where you were?
We had an L's.
L's, that's right. And it's still there. L's on Highway 70, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Very world famous. Yeah.
Hole in the wall places, man. These are places that honestly, if you walk inside, you wonder how in the world they got their permit.
Yeah.
But it's the absolute best food. There's nothing like it.
Dairy Queen. Yeah. Was kind of like L's. You had those around.
Yep.
But they put chili on there. So what happened is there was an Andy's in our mall. Vernon Park Mall is the first place I remember seeing Andy's in the mall. Now, when you go around North Carolina, Andy's are everywhere, but they call them, I think they've changed the name of all of them to Highway 55. So now there's a chain restaurant that's freestanding called Highway 55, and there's one in Gallatin, Tennessee. And I go over there occasionally. And against my wife's better judgment, my better judgment, and I will get hot dogs with chili and slaw and mustard on them, and it actually says on the menu Eastern North Carolina style is what it says.
Yep.
And so that's as close. The hamburgers are very similar, and the hot dogs, the way they taste, the chili and all that is very similar to the way that we had it in Eastern North Carolina. So I do partake probably more than I should.
Yeah. Well, and Moorhead has grown up. I don't know when's the last time you drove through there.
I was there last December. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, it's got Olive Garden. It's got all the chain. It's got all the things that I, as a kid, was wishing we had. But now when I go back, I drive through there and I go, where's my town?
Yeah. Captain Bill's. And even
the
sanitary fish house is all fixed up. And, and where sanitary fish house is where the boats back up. They go fish and they back up literally to the edge of sanitary fish house. Yes. And I remember seeing them take the stuff off the boat and take it in and cook it. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good memories. I'll tell you what else. I'm not a big coffee drinker, and some people are. But when we were kids, you didn't have like coffee shops everywhere.
Mm-mm.
Certainly not these chains. And that doesn't mean nobody drank coffee. They would just drink it at the diner. But you didn't pull into a place that was dedicated to coffee. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And at least not in our area. Maybe in New York or somewhere like that. But looking
you got
back,
coffee from Hardee's, Krispy Kreme.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I've got a quick story about my granddad, my dad's dad. And I know you know this story, David. When we were kids, this goes back now. Krispy Kreme is a North Carolina thing too, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Is it Winston-Salem?
Winston-Salem, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So when we were kids, there was no cell phones. We didn't stop at a payphone. My dad, when we were going to Raleigh, would say, y'all want to stop and see your granddaddy? We go, yeah, we want to see, as kids, you want to see your granddaddy? Sure. We went to Krispy Kreme. My granddaddy was always sitting at the counter at Krispy Kreme drinking coffee.
Yep. Yeah.
How he knew he was going to be there, I don't know, but he was always there. That's a fact.
Yeah. That's crazy.
I think he just got up in the morning and went and sat at that counter all day because he was retired by that time.
Yeah.
And to tell you how poor My dad was, and we're going way, way, way back. My granddaddy would go and eat at a restaurant and without his family. So he would leave grandma and the kids at home, and he would go eat with a friend or something at the restaurant. My dad said the only way that he could get granddaddy to give him money, or his dad to give him money, him and my Uncle Bobby, was they would wait for him to go in that restaurant with his friend and then go in and embarrass him in front of his friend, ask him for money in front of that friend. And that's the way they could get money from it. But he said, as far as them going in a restaurant and eating, it just wasn't a thing. It just didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't have the money for it, man.
No.
When I was a kid, there was a lot of times my parents went out to eat without us in situations that now we just all go out to eat, unless it's a special occasion. Now we might go out by ourselves, but we're going out to eat. The whole family goes out to eat. That was not always the case either.
Yeah.
And we didn't feel like that was bad. That was our life,
That's how it was. When
and
Lori and I first got married, we on Fridays, I've told you this before too. On Fridays, everybody gets paid on Fridays normally. So on Fridays, we would have to decide after work when we got home if we had enough money to go eat that night. Early on, in fact, we didn't have a telephone for the first year of our marriage. We couldn't afford to pay the deposit. You had to give them a deposit. I think it was $100 to get a home phone. I didn't have a home phone for a year.
Wow.
And that we didn't have cell phones. It wasn't like we were using something else. You just didn't have one.
Right.
Couldn't afford it. Yeah.
Yep.
Things have changed so much.
Yes. All right. So how about a little story?
All right.
So we went to Denver one time. My dad was speaking at a conference. And so I was probably 7 or 8 years old. My brother's like 3 years younger than me. And then I got a couple of sisters that are younger. We only had one sister at that point. So we drive from Cleveland, Ohio out to Denver, Colorado. Big cross-country trip. And we get there, and one of the places we eat at is called Sambo's. I don't know if you remember Sambo's.
I've been to Sambo's, yeah.
And
It's kind of like a Stoney's or a,
Denny's, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But they have closed all the Sambo's down, I believe,
Yes.
because of the Sambo. And while we were in there, the whole staff, all the employees, it was a weird situation, and we noticed, even as little kids, that the employees were acting a little different, and the guys were acting a little different with the other guys, and so we were sitting there. We had just started to order our food, and so we're looking around, and my dad, he's just kind of just being there, and my brother and I are looking around, and we asked my dad something like, "What's going on here?" And he said, when we figured out something was not right there, it's time to go.
Yeah.
And so we got up to leave. So, that was a weird experience. And I think it was late at night, and it's just, they were different. All right. Of course, Denver's different anyway. Denver's still different, even today. Yeah. But back then in the 70s, it was
added a little of this. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of stuff going on in Denver. And that night he was like, the moment those boys figured out something was not right, we were out of there.
Yeah.
And so that was Sambo's again. And so there have been, I'm sure there are other restaurants that have gone the way of Sambo's. It's kind of interesting to look back now. None of us ever thought anything bad about Sambo's, but obviously over time, the culture changes, and some things that were acceptable aren't acceptable anymore, and some things that were not acceptable are acceptable. So so you can kind of see that in the food industry as well. As a matter of fact, Hardee's struggled a few years ago because they went really sexual in their advertising, and that did not pay off for them. And they a year or two where they were really hitting it hard with women in bikinis and all this kind of stuff, selling burgers, and from what I understand, it kind of backfired on them. And all of a sudden, one day you wake up and there's no more of those commercials on TV, and they've gone back to selling burgers because of the burgers.
Well, they got rid of the chicken that we were talking about and went back to, you remember the $6 burger? They were trying to get back in the burger game by doing the $6 burger. And if you had a $6 burger, they were really good. Now, a burger this big is $6, but back then it was a pretty nice. They were really good.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because I mentioned the kind of crossover sometimes with food. Wendy's is a burger place, but I really enjoyed, to me, in some ways, nothing's better than getting the bowl of their chili with cheese on it, fries, and a Frosty. that's about as simple a thing as you can get. But there's something about the combination that to me is like, that was worth the trip.
Their chili is number one. And do you know the story about the chili? What people say the chili comes from? They say that when they're cooking hamburgers, whatever falls off the hamburger, they just scoop it in a thing, and that ends up in the chili, and that's why it has that taste. But I'm like you, man. Every now and again, I just got to go get some chili, and it's really good. You put that crackers in it, and they have a little chicken sandwich over there that's only $1.30, and it's really good. Yeah. And when I'm trying to eat really light, and it's not very big, it's about the size of a McDonald's hamburger, a little hamburger, but it's a piece of chicken. It's $1.29, I think, $1.39, and it's actually pretty good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I'm trying to go easy. I'll get chili or I'll get that.
Yeah, that's wild. It's I'm glad I live in a country where we can choose from. I mean, we get to choose from any flavor of the world. In a place like Nashville, for instance, there's not a single place from the world that you can't find somewhere in Nashville that serves something that's going to go with it. That's pretty awesome. But also it gets to the point where you sit there and you sit in the car and you go, where are we going to go? I don't know. Yeah. It's like having 600 channels on your dish, Yeah. It's like you want it when you're a kid. Yeah. You've gone from 3 channels or 5 channels on your TV to 600 channels. And then in a few years, you're like, there's nothing to watch.
Yeah, that's true.
And the same thing is true with the plurality of restaurants as well.
Well, I struggle for lunch in Gallatin because I don't want to overeat. But if I'm given the chance, I will overeat. So I try to do things that will keep me from doing that. And that's what I'm saying. I'll go get just that chili, or I'll go get just that chicken, or I'll go and this is really good for me, I'll go to Taco Bell and just get 2 tacos, 2 regular, soft shell tacos, and that kind of stuff.
Thank you very much.
Now that means that we have 3 minutes left, but we're probably going to go a little bit over because I wanted to ask you about, since I brought up Taco Bell, your first remembrances of Taco Bell, because for you young people that are listening to this, Taco Bell was not always around. Taco Bell, I don't think I had Taco Bell till I was grown. Mm-hmm. Now, it was out on the West Coast, but it was not in North Carolina that I remember until, I'm going to say I was 25 years old, which I'm, 59 now. So what's that, 30 years ago, 35 years ago? Yeah.
I think that's true. I remember it in Greensboro, probably in 1986 or 87, somewhere in there, I think, is the first time. But we also lived in Texas for a while, and they have Taco Bueno down there.
Yeah.
And it's different. It's not like a Texas Taco Bell, like we were talking about Hardee's or Carl's.
Yeah.
It's different. It's a different chain entirely, but it's a different taste and a flavor. And so,
and out west they have that Del Taco as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So,
but and my first remembrance of Taco Bell was in Kinston. They built one next to it was close to I'm going to say it was close to the Burger King. It may have been a little further down the street, but I didn't eat there. I didn't know what it was. So it was a thing where somebody had to, I don't even know how I even got there, but we've also talked about, since we've talked about that, I didn't eat Mexican until, I'm going to say, I moved to Nashville in 1999. I'm going to say I didn't have Mexican at a Mexican restaurant probably till 96 or 97. And probably along that same time, Chinese. Up till then, I don't remember there being a Mexican restaurant around us or a Chinese restaurant around us anywhere.
No.
Now
we grew up basically.
Yeah,
that's right. That's exactly right. And so I think I ate American food basically until I was almost, certainly in my late teens.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean I never had anything else, but generally speaking, if we went somewhere, it was American food. And then all of a sudden you start to taste Mexican food or Japanese steakhouse or whatever. You're like, ooh, like that.
You got something on there.
That's an interesting thing.
Well,
so the other thing is
Chinese in movies. That was it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Chinese takeout. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the other thing you didn't have was delivery. The only place that would deliver basically was the pizza place.
That's right.
And that means they would bring sandwiches if they did little submarine sandwiches or something. But there was a long period of time, basically, when the only thing was delivered was pizza. And now all of a sudden, everybody's a pizza deliverer. They're delivering everything but pizza,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another interesting thing that's changed in our generation.
In Kinston, they had dollar pizza. That's my first recollection of delivery pizza. It was literally called dollar pizza. And you could order a pizza and you could order Boss drinks. They would bring the 2-liter drinks and you could order hot dogs. They had hot dogs. And that place was the Captain's Corner. Me and you've talked about the Captain's Corner before. And there's a guy, he's actually passed away recently, Brad Elmore. He married a girl that's parents owned the Captain's Corner, and he owned a place called Sugar Hill Pizza in Kinston.
Okay.
And if any of y'all that are listening that are from around Kinston, you're going to know all these places and all these people. But they had hot dogs over there, $3 for $1. And I would literally, when I first started, after Lori and I, but actually before Lori and I got married, when I first started working on cars in the car business, for lunch, I would go to the Captain's Corner and get $5 worth of hot dogs. And for those of you that can do math, that's 15 hot dogs for lunch. And I would eat every one of them for lunch. That's a fact. Hot dogs with the chili on it, the mustard, just like I'm talking about. You could get it with slaw. I didn't usually get with slaw or anything, but I would dip them in ketchup, and I would eat 15 hot dogs for lunch. A lot of times, a lot of days. And after I got married, man, my weight jumped up. I got that early married 30 pounds, really. It was probably more than that.
Well, we talk about restaurants that go away, but I'll give you an instance of a whole genre that's gone away. When I grew up and you grew up in North Carolina, there were a lot of what we would call cafeterias.
Yes, absolutely. Right? Piccadilly and C&W. Wasn't it C&W?
Yeah. And S&S and
S&S,
Yep. Mm-hmm. And now, guess what? I remember at the time we would enjoy going, but you did start to notice it was all older people going to cafeterias a lot. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe when I get old, I'll be sitting in the cafeteria. I'll walk through the line and all the desserts, everything looked really good behind that glass, and you got to choose what you wanted. You would take your tray all the way down, fill it up, and then you would pay and go sit yourself at the table. And I could not find a cafeteria today to save my life.
I know of one, and that's in Memphis, just past Graceland on the left. Piccadilly is still open down there.
Really?
Yeah, there's a Piccadilly on the left. That's the only one that I can think of at this point.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. And you just don't see that type setup. And my wife, look, we love to eat when we got married, they had you had Ryan's, you had the Golden Corral. When the kids were little, we would eat at the Golden Corral every Friday night, usually. Yep. Now, my wife won't set foot in those places. She says, oh, no, it's not sanitary. We're not going there. I still love to go there. If I have an opportunity, I'll go. But you really don't find those very many places anymore.
No, not very often.
Yeah. Nope. But what I loved is you could go in there and get a little piece of steak. You could get a little piece of chicken. You could get a pizza. You could get I love salad with Thousand Island on it and bacon bits. And I like those hard bacon bits. And I'll tell you a story about that real quick. The very first time that I remember eating a steak was at Bonanza, it was called Bonanza in Greenville, North Carolina. I guess it would be Memorial Boulevard. And we were so poor that it was a thing where if we were able to go, my mom, I remember, that's the first time I remember Thousand Island dressing. I love a salad with Thousand Island on it and cheese and tomato, croutons, those hard bacon bits. And I'll even add in banana pepper, some different stuff. But there's something about that combination that I just love. But there would be times that we would go and I would say, Mom, can I get the bacon bits? And sometimes she would say yes. And sometimes she would say no. And they were 50 cents more. And so that's why I have such an affection for those bacon bits, because there was a time when I couldn't have them. And people want things they can't have.
That's true.
Yeah. But that was at Bonanza. Yeah. That's the first time I ever remember eating a steak was there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Bonanza, Ponderosa, Western Sizzlin', Western Steer, Golden Corral.
Yeah. Yeah. All those. Yeah. And most of those are gone.
Yeah. How is that possible?
Yeah. And well, I tell you what took the place of a lot of them is Texas Roadhouse.
Yeah,
you can
that's
go
true.
in Texas Roadhouse and you can get a 6-ounce sirloin, a baked potato, a salad with Thousand Island on it, just like I like it, and a drink for what, $16, $17?
Right. Exactly.
And the service is always good. The food is always good. It's always consistent. I don't know how you can beat it. The downside to Texas Roadhouse is I blow hassle Billy. It's a hassle to get in there because you have to wait so long.
Right.
And so there's a lot of times when we just drive right by because we know that it's going to be a hassle to get in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we need to do another episode. Since we're really running long in this episode, we need to do another episode about why we go to certain restaurants and why we don't go to certain restaurants. And also, this podcast is called WCWAM, which is Wishing Cotton Was a Monkey, which is the art of pretending things are different than they actually are, which we live in a world of that. And I have recently run into a couple of times where I have experienced WCWAM at a restaurant, and I wrote it down in my phone so I could remember it, particular things. So we need to talk about that.
Yes.
So let's wrap this up, David. And we need to do another one. And let's talk about what attracts us to a restaurant, what distracts us from a restaurant, and also what's WCWAM in restaurants. Is that fair?
Yes.
All
yeah,
right.
That'd be great. My wife has one of those. She grew up and she remembers eating it at the White Castle when she was a kid. And so we moved from where the White Castles were. And then when we moved back to a place where there were White Castles, she was like, "Oh, I love White Castle." And we went to get White Castle. And the magic was not there. And that's, but in her mind, that was so awesome.
And as kids, it's a thing where you want things you can't have. And we were so poor that going out to eat wasn't a thing. My kids don't know what that means. You know, we went out to eat when they were kids. We just did. Now I don't have to even think about on a Friday if we're going to. And Lori and I love Carrabba's, but I probably love it more than she does. But she gives in to me. But we'll talk about that in the next episode.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, that's a teaser right there.
That is a teaser. Thank you so much, David. And look, y'all tighten up every chance you get, and we'll be back and we'll talk about pluses and minuses of restaurants, what we do like, what we don't like, and we're going to talk about some real live WCWAM in restaurants today, things that are happening right now. And we talked about last week some WCWAM, but we'll talk about some WCWAM this week in other restaurants, not just that one.
That's right.
We'll be right back next week.